Good morning and welcome. It's a Friday morning and it's Sunrise Daily. I'm Ayo Makinde.
Well, it's a beautiful Friday morning at that. You're welcome to the program. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. And it will seem that the Hamatan in Abuja passed a memo to Lagos. Because I came out this morning and I felt that sting, you know, that little Hamatan sting as though it's starting.
When you're in urban Nigeria, you don't feel it early, but
as much,
go
right?
to the hinterlands, my constituency. They started feeling
You sound like a politician. When you align with a certain group of people just to get their votes. But you know, quite a lot of things happen in the nation's capital because it's a political capital, right? And that's where we have, you know, the seat of power, the federal government, the National Assembly, and the rest. And that's where we'll start from this morning. It's been in the news for quite some time now, and that's the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. And just recently, a few things were tweaked. And in particular, we're focusing on the talk around direct primaries. So we'd like you to listen to this lawmaker. Yes, INEC actually was at the National Assembly yesterday to brief lawmakers on how direct primaries will work. Recall that the National Assembly had summoned INEC to tell them just the cost of direct primaries. So that happened, and this is the outcome. So take a listen.
In our discussion with the INEC chairman, it was on two discussions. One, his requirement for 2023 election. Secondly, on direct or indirect primaries. And on the direct or indirect primaries, in what we discussed with him, he specifically told us the role of INEC in direct or indirect primaries is just minimal. Everything relies on all political parties. Party primaries are roles of political parties, not INEC. That's what we discussed with him. For direct primaries, as what INEC chairman told us, is only political parties has responsibility on primaries. Funding on primaries are for political parties, not INEC.
Thank you. Sir, Honorable Sir, how would you feel if the president eventually rejects it, as reported today in the paper?
We don't know whether he rejected or he signed the bill.
So, well, that last part about the president rejecting or not the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, well, there's no clarity to that, and we'll expect to hear from the presidency because there's been some news around that. So it's still quite unclear, and we'll need to get that confirmation, which we will definitely get just for you. But about the direct primaries, which was the major reason for that visit, it sounded to me as though the INEC chairman told the lawmakers that you shouldn't have invited me. I mean, this is not my business. This is essentially in your purview. Ours is to conduct national elections. When it comes to party elections, it is your responsibility. Yes, we will monitor as INEC, but I mean, do you want us to tell you how much it will cost you to conduct your primary? So it sounded as though the INEC chairman was saying that, but it was good to get that clarification, to get the INEC chairman speak about that. So the ball is back in the court of the political parties, and I dare say it never left at any time anyway. But these are the points for me. I just wish a lot more Nigerians will be involved in this process. Yes, lawmakers are meant to represent, you know, the majority of people, in fact, people in general. So it's expected that these views that the lawmakers, you know, put out on the floor, the bills that are made are a representation of the desire and yearnings of the people. But I really wish that people will be actively involved in this because it's going to play big, I mean, in the 2023 elections and future elections, but more importantly, in the kind of leadership we get. If we're to go direct primaries, it will mean that everybody, or at least everybody that belongs to a party, will need to be very involved in party affairs. And I know voting might look like voting is the big deal, but in terms of even donating finances as well, I look forward to a time when it's not just the big players that dominate political parties, when it's not just the big spenders that dominate political parties, even the people that can just donate 500 naira, 1,000, they should have a say. Because at the end of the day, when we go out to vote in the general elections, it's those same people that will vote for leaders. So I just look forward to a time that a lot more people will be involved in this one. So clearly now, political parties will have to decide whether this is the way to go. All eyes on the president to sign that bill into law Will the president sign it? Is the question.
I think another angle that a good number of people, maybe even the National Assembly, was hoping to get some clarity or direction, is what it will cost INEC, for instance, to be a part of the direct primaries. And clearly, of course, the INEC chairman told them, we're not the ones organizing the direct primaries, so how is the cost going to be our business? But the thinking, and perhaps this should be maybe explored a little further, a little deeper, would be what indeed it will cost INEC to supervise the direct primaries, to observe the direct primaries as they ought to, according to law. So those questions are still there, and we're just hoping, of course, the INEC chairman himself has said, we won't know what is being assigned to us until the bill, has been passed and signed into law for effective implementation. So it is the political parties that is going to bear the cost of the primaries, fine. But will they also bear the cost of INEC supervising or observing the primaries? That's another conversation altogether. So those are the issues. Should who do what? Exactly the point, the question here.
I honestly don't think
exactly. So. Well, that's the question here. So it is the political parties that will bear the cost of direct primaries. Yes. Will the political parties also contribute money for INEC to observe the primaries? The direct primaries now, being specific? Because, of course, they are going to hold at different times, okay, so you're going to tell INEC this is going to hold, and INEC is going to say, no, you can't hold it there because so-so party has already, said it is going to hold its own primary at that time, so that is taken. But the question is INEC manned enough? Is INEC equipped enough with personnel to observe all direct primaries? If, for instance, the direct primaries are going to hold every day for, like, say, 2 weeks, given the number of political parties that we have, is that cost also factored in? I don't know, but it's part of the questions, part of the things to observe.
So, we can talk about the costs, which is very important. But, we should all talk about the big picture, the goal, what we're trying to achieve, ensure better governance, ensure increased participation, ensure that people essentially have a say.
That there is no doubt about that. The function of direct primaries is clear. Those who are having one issue or the other about it, they have their reasons. But the global reason is everyone knows that somehow this is going to pay, is going to help our democracy to get stronger and become better, be more inclusive. That's a given. But don't also forget that there is a major player in the INEC. We need to also consider how INEC is going to be able to do its job creditably well. Another issue as concerning INEC is something that you're already aware of as well. The INEC national commissioners. We understand that quite a number of them are due to, their tenures are due to expire anytime soon, if not already expired. So question the number of people are asking is, so where are we going to have these new commissioners from? Are they going to be like the last time when a member of a political party or a former member of a political party or someone sentimental to a political party?
People had to put it really because you say this, they say, no, this is how it happened.
Well, so let's also try to look at the various angles that it is. So that's also crucial here because if you're going to get someone involved in this process, for instance, it's not a plug and play. You need to understand how the system works. You need to understand what it takes to be a national commissioner. So it's not just an internship where you get in and then within 3-4 weeks, you know exactly how it runs. No. The earlier we put people in the system to understand how the system works, being brought on board or onboarded, as we say, by those who are already in the system, the earlier we do that, the better for us. But the issues around strengthening INEC's capacity, infrastructurally, both soft and hard infrastructure, is crucial to our elections. The direct primaries cost is most certainly important. But then, how we are even onboarding people about the entire process, that's really crucial.
Succession planning.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, those who are in government today, in 20 years, they will not be. a whole new set of people are going to be in the system. So are we having that long-term plan to ensure that our democracy is not just for now, it's not just for the next election, but for the next generation? Those are the questions, Guy.
Well, speaking of the next generation, let's switch to the dailies.
Okay, the next item on the program.
It's the next generation of items. We're back with the dailies in a moment.
We begin with the Nigerian Tribune this morning, and it talks about the same thing. Political parties to bear cost of primaries. That's the lead of the Nigerian Tribune this morning. INEC tells reps, that's what you have, political parties to bear cost of primaries. INEC tells reps. More on that on page 3 of the Nigerian Tribune this morning. Lobby if you want presidency. ACF tells Southeast leaders. The story is also on page 3 of the paper this morning. And one that will definitely make a lot of news is on the picture on the front page, the major picture right under the major headline. Akande, other AD governors victims of Obasanjo's diabolical double cross. That's ascribed to the President Buhari. Find the details on page 4. Governors, ministers, others attend presentation of Akande's autobiography. Find the details on the inside pages of the paper this morning. That's the Nigerian Tribune today. Oh, by the way, sports on the back page. Napoli will help Osimhen make surprise return. Ascribed to Spalletti, still doubtful for AFCON. That's according to Raw. That's the Nigerian Tribune this morning.
Well, let's take a look at Leadership Friday for you next. And it leads with something similar to what you've seen on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune. And it's on the Electoral Act Amendment Bill and others. PMB has not rejected Electoral Act Amendment Bill presidency. So talk about a response, right? No communication from President yet. National Assembly override him if he ignores the yearnings of Nigerians, CSOs. And INEC says, our role in conduct of direct primaries minimal. And then the question will follow, who is going to fund that minimal role, right? I think that's a question to be answered as well. So that's the big story on the front page of Leadership Friday. And you see FG flags of mass vaccination of refugees, IDPs on COVID-19. And this one, troops kill 62 terrorists, rescue 20 policemen. You wonder if there's a time frame to this context. There's more details definitely on the inside pages, as well as the sad one, Katsina commissioner assassinated as bandits kill 16, kidnap 25 in Niger. I mean, just 3 insecurity-related stories. One a success, but 2 others a sad one. That's Leadership Friday.
Switch to the Guardian newspaper, and it's not a pleasant one on its front page this morning. Save us from killers, bandits, Sultan, can GNI tell Buhari? Well, it's definitely something very troubling. Sultan, for instance, is not saying this for the first time. Nigerians are being killed like chickens. That's ascribed to someone. Bandits murdered 80 people in a single night. Sokoto leaders write Buhari. Gunmen kill Katsina commissioner in residence. Bandits gunned down 15 worshippers inside mosque in Niger. Impose 10 million naira fine on Zamfara communities. Troops rescue 20 abducted policemen in Yobe. Amnesty says Buhari's orders to security agencies have changed nothing. FG, insecurity responsible for Nigeria's fall from preferred investment destination. Find all these on the front page, continues on page 6. And right under that picture you see there, I can go into jungle with Akande, says Buhari. Insecurity, I don't sympathize with you. You applied to be president, says Akande. At book launch, Nigerians pour tributes and encomiums on Akande and several others you'll find right on the front page of the Guardian newspaper. The details are on the inside pages. COVID-19 cases, okay?
Oh, the talk about, you applied for the job. And, people tell you, you begged to apply for these jobs. And you said, I'm capable. In the corporate context, that's what you hear people say. You said you're capable, right? You said you can work under intense pressure.
You can work with minimal security, with minimal supervision under intense pressure.
And you're a great team worker. Great, all those things they put on the CV, right? So I guess that's...
I think we should begin to give our presidents a letter of appointments.
And referees as well.
Referees,
Okay. Interesting.
All right, COVID-19 cases surge as Omicron spreads in Africa. Not so good, but that's the story on the front page of The Guardian. Page 3 has the details of that one.
Well, the Vanguard newspaper is next, and it's quite a lot on the front page of the Daily, I must tell you. But let me start with the big one. Sokoto tragedy. Can Sultan decry worsening state of insecurity? It's a page 5 read, and there's a host of riders for that one. I'll take just a few. Nigerians are being killed like chickens. That's credited to Can. FG should do more beyond condemning killing of Nigerians. Sultan laments government lacks will to hold security chiefs to account. And there's a host of riders, as I said, but you find more details, pages 5 and I think 32 of the Vanguard newspaper this morning. And there's this sad one. Vanguard reporter Todre Salem for burial tomorrow. We expect that the investigations are still on to unravel exactly what happened. We understand someone is in custody. We reported that as well. But it's always good to see the update to that one as well. You see, banks' fees, commission income rise 31% to 384.8 billion naira. And that one about insecurity in Imo. Gunmen on rampage in Imo abduct monarch. There's Mr. and Mrs. for you, perhaps just a little bit of humor this morning. There's so much sad stories on the front page. And you see Mr. telling Mrs. that women don't demand things from their husbands. They ask. And Mrs. goes, I'm sorry, dear, anything for the girls? So, yeah, anything for the girls. There's sports on the back page. Napoli, Nigeria on collision course over Osimhen. You wonder why? Nigerian medical team to assess him. We see Delio Rossi saying Napoli can't win Scudetto without Osimhen. So is that much of a collision course? Well, more details on the inside pages. And just one more. Saw this story yesterday. Super Falcons player turns bus driver in England. So it's mixed, really, and it was a quite interesting read. That's the Vanguard newspaper this morning.
Well, you want to find out why that happened?
Okay, I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. In fact, the cat should not be in the bag in the first place. That's like animal cruelty, right? But the point is, the details are on the inside pages of the Vanguard newspaper.
New Telegraph is next, and this is the lead, also talking about insecurity. People are killed daily in the north. That's ascribed to the Sultan. Tells Christians not to be afraid of going to church. It's worrisome. Security agencies can't fish out kidnappers. That's ascribed to Can. The details of the story on page 2 of the New Telegraph newspaper this morning. And right above the nameplate would seem like the finance bill is already raising some dust. Adverts. Facebook to charge 7.5% VAT from January. Is it only in Nigeria? Well, the details you'll find on the inside pages. Omicron could cost global economy additional $5.3 trillion. That's ascribed to IMF. Find the details on the inside pages. Anti-graft FG to adopt non-conviction forfeiture in 2020. Beg your pardon, 2022. That's ascribed to Pakak Scribe. Says no data of corruption cases in the country. Now that is worrisome. No data of corruption cases in the country. We should be asking a number of questions there. What data does the EFCC, the ICPC work with? Find the details of that story on page 2 of the New Telegraph. And right under the picture, Akande, victim of Obasanjo's political double cross. And that's also on pages 3 and 5 of the New Telegraph this morning.
Well, next up is Daily Trust with that sad story from Katsina State. Katsina commissioner assassinated and 15 worshippers killed in Niger. So it's from Katsina and from Niger as well. Bandits attack Abuja homes, kidnap residents. Well, Abuja is in the news as well as the other riders you may have seen across the dailies. Tragedy as northbound travelers electrocuted in Lagos. Wonder what happened. Or how that happened, I should say. More details on the inside page. Is really sad. And that one, Nigerians to pay 7.5% VAT on Facebook adverts, also makes the front page. So we're going to go into that finance bill definitely, because there's quite a number of things that you should know about and we should analyze. It's not law yet, just yet, still a bill. So there's still work to be done. Let's leave it there for the Daily Trust.
Nigerian News Direct is next, and it's like, here's another pot for the presidency, for the federal government to take from. FGI's 600 trillion cubic feet gas reserves. Increase will position Nigeria among leading gas exploring nations. That's ascribed to the Minister of State for Petroleum. And the details you'll find on page 22. Is this some work already for Train 7 of the NLNG? Well, hopefully page 22 will give you more details of that. And several other stories you want to pick from on the front page of the paper this morning. US donates 2.5 million doses of Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines to Nigeria. I'm very sure the first question that is going to be is, check the expiry date.
Absolutely. and that's true. That was the first thing I thought about when I saw that
with
donation.
your eyes, I could see.
So it's like, thank you very much. We are grateful for that donation. Can we see the expiry date? And as we said yesterday, I think Harvard and Gavi, they've tried to say, you know what, the shelf life, as soon as it enters the country, should not be less than 10 weeks, I believe. So that's about two months and 2 weeks. And as Professor Tomori said yesterday, there should be, there should be an improvement in logistics. If someone is meant to pick up this by 8 a.m., the person should be there by 8 a.m. because it's those little things that add up, and eventually logistics become a big issue.
At the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the primary health care development agency, because if they do not have a direct working relationship with the local government system, which we all know the state in which it is now, then there is a problem already. How many people are even happy to go to the PHCs to get vaccinated? How many people really? As Professor Tomori, well, he would be in a better position to know that a good number of local government areas or PHCs are under lock and key now. So the question then is, who is paying attention to these things and who is giving life or verve to them? But that's the...
Well, we are, for one.
Well, definitely we are, but who is getting anything to do, getting anyone to do anything about it, to give it verve, to give it life? That's it. Terrorists, bandits killings, Northern Coalitions blast FG. Find the details of that one on page 3 of the Nigerian News Direct this morning. And that's a look at the papers this morning. We're back after now to take on the issues for the day. Please stay with us. Well, thank you very much for staying with us this morning. We have two gentlemen to look at the issues around the Finance Bill of 2021 that's just recently been sent to the National Assembly and how that may or may not help the Nigerian economy. Wabuzo Emeke is a council member, Chartered Institute of Taxation in Nigeria. He joins us from our studio in Abuja, as well as Taiwo Oyedele, who is Africa Tax Leader, PwC. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. Mr. Emeke, let me begin with you. Well, quite a number of laws again to be amended with the Finance Bill 2021. How does it come across to you?
Well, good morning, viewers. 2021 Finance Bill is a welcome development. You know, it has been something that have been started implementing from 2029 up to 2020 and now 2021 bill. It's a welcome development in the sense that that is one of the basic foundation for implementation of the 2022 Appropriation Act. As it is, if it's well implemented, I'm very confident that it's going to improve the economy. However, we still have our concerns as professionals because the way it's being handled, it looks as if it's being put together hurriedly, as we expected more wider consultations.
To that one, by 2029, I hope you meant 2019. Well, Mr. Oyedele, you have been at this for quite a while yourself, and first of all, and you've done quite some work trying to help people understand it. First of all, how does it resonate with you? This is for the umpteenth time, it's like every time there is the finance bill comes out, there are amendments to all of our, revenue generating laws. Mr. Oyedele, we do not have your audio. If you could check to unmute.
Okay, so I'm actually unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, thank you very much, Ayo. So I was trying to say that first I need to state that I'm a member of the committee that worked on the finance bill, but I do not speak for government and I'm not speaking for the committee. So having said that, I think it's commendable that as a country we've been able to sustain the periodic and annual amendments to the laws. I think it's just the reality that nothing is static. The economy is dynamic and the circumstances that we face, they change very frequently. So we cannot afford to have legislations that are static and not dynamic to be able to address those circumstances. So this finance bill, for example, is seeking to amend about 12 or 13 different pieces of legislation, many of them bordering on taxation, but also we have some bordering on the establishment of certain agencies, as well as fiscal responsibility. Overall, I think we have some changes there that are good news. We have those that are not so good news, especially from the perspective of the private sector and businesses. But I'll say that within the context of what we're having to deal with as a country, overall, the proposals are understandable.
Oh, yes, 12 laws, as it stands, are meant to be amended with this 2021 finance bill, as you referenced. And our guest in Abuja also referenced, I mean, this comes with the budget. So this is like the side dish, as I jokingly said yesterday. That's the finance bill, and the entree is the appropriation bill itself. But this is a third in its series. We'll still get into the nitty-gritties of this one, but I just want us to take a step back a bit. The third in its series. So we had 2020, 2019, 2020, and now 2021. And I think it's important to just review how effective the previous ones have been. Because if you look at the objectives of the finance bill itself, what it is meant to achieve, I mean, the government put out the objectives, and I'm sure you've referenced that time and again, is meant to reform Nigeria's tax laws, support MSMEs in line with ease of doing business. It's meant to incentivize investments in infrastructure and capital markets, and as you can see, raise government revenue. So these are the objectives that we set out to achieve with the first one in 2019. From your perspective, Mr. Oyedele, let me just begin with you on that point. Have we been able to achieve these objectives with the Finance Bill or the Finance Act 2019-2020?
Yes, a very, very good question, actually. So this is one area where, as a country, we can do a lot better. We're not very good with making an assessment of the impact in terms of the various government policies, even beyond taxation. So you can see all the nice stuff and the rhetorics. You can even get the applause of the people. But at the end of the day, like they say, the devil is in the details. So on the ground and in reality, are people feeling the impact? We do not have, reliable data in Nigeria, and nobody is tracking that, intentionally to be able to come back to us and say, in all these important areas, this is where we were at the time we introduced policies. Now this is where we are and where these are the gaps that we have, and this is what we plan to do about those gaps. But if I want to speak broadly, I'll say in terms of raising revenue for government, you would recall that the 2019 Finance Act introduced the VAT rate at 7.5%, which was 5% before then. And we have seen that progression in the revenue collection, particularly VAT, to the extent that last year, VAT collection ranked #1 of all the taxes in Nigeria, even ahead of petroleum profit tax. So to that extent, there has been progress in that area. I would say maybe more is even expected. If you think about SMEs, they were exempted from, paying companies income tax. If their turnover was less than 25 million a year, they did not have to worry about VAT registration and charging VAT. But my experience on the ground is that the vast majority of SMEs are not even aware. And even for those that are aware, they're like, well, I wasn't making any profit before. If you exempt me from tax, it means nothing to me. Or they were not even in the tax net. So overall, it's good in terms of trying to encourage formalization in particular. But in terms of the impact on SMEs, it has been very marginal. So if you think about modernizing the tax system to be in line with the rest of the world, again, some progress have been made, especially in terms of using technology and intelligence. So the tax authority now can connect to the systems of taxpayers to get data and information directly so that the chances for tax evasion and aggressive avoidance is significantly reduced, including introduction of significant economic presence for digital economy. So overall, we have made some progress. My assessment is a lot more still needs to be done.
You'll tell us a little more about those things that need to be done in a bit, because definitely there's so much to cover in this conversation. But Mr. Emeke, you began earlier by saying that you had some concerns, especially with the finance bill. Can you tell us a few of them?
One of the issues, like I said, is issue of consultations. And because if you find out the way the previous acts were implemented, there are a lot of concerns actually going around it. Basically, the implementation is another thing entirely. Like my professional colleague said, in terms of implementation by the tax authority, like the SMEs that are actually exempted, I mean those who have 25 million below, if you still walk into most of the tax authority, FRS, the impression there is that they are still expected to file. Meanwhile, it's expected that they are not supposed to file, and before you know it, they are faced with penalties, for non-compliance. That is just one of them. Then the second, again, is that issue of information and sensitization. It is still very, very below average. Most of the taxpayers are not even aware of what is going on, in terms of this finance bill and the rest of it. Then, still in line with issue of whether it has improved the system. Basically, yes, like he mentioned the issue of VAT. On issue of even stamp duty, like from 2019 to 2020, it moved from about 18 billion to about 120 billion, which is over 500% increase. So in terms of revenue, it's okay. But like I said, entirely on the ease of doing business, there is a whole lot of concern around about this.
Well, when you talk about the SMEs not needing to file, I'm wondering how government or the authorities would know that they have not crossed the 25 million naira threshold if they do not file.
No. You see, the issue is the law. They say that, based on the previous year's turnover, they already know they are within that threshold. Now, that they are not filing monthly does not mean when they file their annual account that they will not be still caught in the net. So if they are exempted from monthly VAT filing and remittances, at the end of the year, they're expected to file the annual return. So even if those of them that know that they are above 25 million and deliberately refuse to file, by the time they file the annual return, they'll be made to suffer the consequences, which is the issue of the penalties and the interest on whatever amount that they did not file.
Well, Mr. Yedele, I want to speak to that because I know that you also mentioned something around that earlier about those who are not in the tax net and those who are in the tax net but are not even aware. So you want to speak to that filing part that Mr. Omeke talked about?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So one, you need to get to a point where you capture all the information about your taxpayers, and you don't necessarily have to wait for them to file returns. There are countries, even in Africa, including Rwanda, where no taxpayer even needs to file VAT returns because government is able to get that information directly as you issue invoices and all of that. They're able to get it into their system. So you don't have to place the burden on small businesses to file returns just for you to know. By the way, nobody does business and transaction with themselves. So chances are that even these small businesses are transacting with large firms. So if I'm selling any product without naming any particular product, chances are that it's a big company that is manufacturing them. If I'm manufacturing those products myself, it means that government needs to find a way during my personal income tax returns and the other intelligence in terms of the payment system, when I pay my suppliers on the banking system, they should be able to pick that information and to do whatever analysis they need to do and only allow me to file my annual returns rather than monthly returns. But the other area I want to address, is your point about what are these areas of concerns and areas that I think that government could have done differently. And there are a few of them, but I'll focus on the most important ones. Number one is we have been talking about multiple taxation in Nigeria since I have been an adult. More than 20 years I've been practicing taxation. But every single time we talk about it, we tend to take steps that are even, compounding the problem further. So we have officially over 60 different taxes in Nigeria, unofficially more than 200. And having said that, even this year alone, the National Assembly has passed a bill that is seeking to introduce another levy on companies for what they call tertiary healthcare fund, right? We have all manners of earmark taxes for, whether it's education, whether it's information technology, whether it's police, whether it's engineering and infrastructure development agency. They're just all over the place. I don't know whether anybody is adding up those numbers, those 1% here, 2% there, whether it's even now more than 100%. So that's a big issue. We're still not addressing that. And I would love for us to be able to do that. The other one is multiplicity of agencies. So you create new agencies every time and they're collecting revenue. There's loads of MDAs that are collecting revenue, right? The National Tax Policy approved in 2017 prescribes that there should be only one tax authority per level of government. So which means at the federal government level, it should be only the FRS. Even Nigerian Customs Service should be merged with the FRS, like you have in Ghana, GRA, like you have in South Africa, SARS, like you have in Kenya, like you have in the UK, HMRC. That way, the opportunity for people to game the system is significantly reduced. And then we need to ensure that we use data and technology to capture people who have the ability to pay, but they are not paying. I usually say that when people have money and businesses, they do three things. They spend, they save, they invest. You need to track all those streams of spending, of saving and investment to know who is evading taxes. Why is it that Nigeria has never collected 1 trillion naira in personal income tax of all the 36 states? But South Africa, with less than 1/3 of our population, collects about 14 trillion, even though their exemption for the poor people not to pay tax is even higher than the threshold in Nigeria. So these are the areas where I would like for us to deal with, especially now that revenue matters seem to be the biggest challenge that Nigeria faces, second only to insecurity.
Mr. Oyedele, you raised quite a number of points, and let me just try to follow up on some of them. First, you said that there are 200 or over 200 unofficial taxes being collected. I just want to understand, are you saying that governments are collecting those taxes without laws to back them, or you're saying non-government actors collect those taxes on behalf of government and they don't remit into government coffers? Or what do you mean by over 200 unofficial taxes?
Yes, so it's both actually. So you have governments, especially at the local government level, collecting a lot of illegitimate taxes that are not supported by any law. You have some of it at the state level, right? But overall, that's government. So government itself is a problem in terms of multiplicity of taxes, both the ones that are legitimate, i.e. supported by law, and those that are not. Now, there's a list called approved list of taxes and levies. So that list has over 60. That's what I refer to as the official number of taxes. But then when you ask taxpayers, there was a study we did for the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Simple thing, just ask manufacturer, tell me all the taxes you pay and provide the receipts and the evidence. And when we added up, there was a particular state where manufacturers alone were paying 197 different taxes, right? So one, there's government. And then you have non-state actors, again, supported by the powers that be, who just make up their own taxes as they go along, right? So these are what we call informal taxes. No law to support it. The money doesn't go to government. In fact, there was a report about Lagos State and ag bureaus collecting over 120 billion naira a year. That is the largest of any IGR in Nigeria other than in Lagos State. If you add on top of that, there's the implicit tax that Nigerians have to take care of what government should ordinarily be doing for them, fixing their road, the road to their factory, providing security, generating water. If you put all of this together, it's just too much burden on a country where you need all the enablement and the right environment for development, for business growth, and then employment generation.
That's quite interesting, Mr. Oyedele, because the talk is always, we need to widen the tax net. But, from what you say, it looks like that tax net is already wide. We just need to make them official, as it were, and make sure those monies come into government. Because, it would seem everybody, literally everyone, pays one form of tax or the other. So is it a matter of widening that tax net or just making them official, backing them up by law and ensuring that those monies go into government coffers?
Yeah, so I think there are two things. One, the tax net is wide to some extent, but I think it has a lot of wrong people in the net, right? So every time you hear this in Nigeria, at all levels of government, they think that their money is with the informal sector. My view is that, out of the informal sector, you should probably target the top 1%. Leave the informal sector alone. Just collect data from them. They don't need to pay taxes. That's why many countries have thresholds for VAT registration, thresholds for personal income tax, thresholds for VAT and CIT, including even Ghana. I'm not even talking about the US, including Kenya. Now, you then have a lot of people making heavy money and transactions that are not in the net, or they are partially in the net, like one leg is inside the net and the rest of their body is outside of it because they make 10 billion and they declare 1 billion if you're lucky. So government needs to address that in terms of the tax net to ensure that we have the right people in the net, and then we put the burden, because now we have it disproportionately on the lower end of the economy. And the more important point is actually that we shouldn't be having more taxes we should have less. I wish government can say today, we have identified 50 different taxes that are creating more problems than solutions, and we want to repeal all of them and replace with one tax. It will interest you to know that in Nigeria, less than 10 taxes give us more than 98% of our revenue at all levels of government. And here we are with over 200. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Oh, Mr. Emeke, I imagine this resonates with you a lot because you have to deal with, taxation, different levels, help out to basically make the accounts add up, as it were. So is there some work being done to ensure that maybe these taxes are made official, or that we just make this, proper in a sense, so that we know what we're getting and we know where we need to work on? Is the CITN making moves on that one?
Yeah, just like Oyedele said, he said that in Nigeria we have about 3 kind of taxes we pay: the formal tax, the informal tax, and the impressive tax. And if you put all these together, you talk about issue of multiplicity of tax. But on CITN level, we see we've been doing a lot of wider consultation. We have been engaging the government, In fact, part of this Finance Bill 2021, we made a very critical input into it and expressed our opinion. But one thing again is for you to be able to give advice, and that is for it to be taken. On the side of the taxpayers, we have been doing a lot of sensitization, because actually we expect more from the government, Like there's the now, we're talking about the issue of the multiplicity of taxes. You talk about the issue of the burning matter on VAT and being a consumption tax. You can see that the finance bill is actually silent on it. And these are issues that boils down to what the taxpayers are bearing. So looking at it holistically, you find out that there is so much more to be done, And talking about issue of tax net, yes, it's not the widening of tax net actually entails more or less bringing more people into the tax net. Not really talking about bringing the illegal taxes or more formalizing those taxes, but no, it's the issue of bringing more people into the tax net, because the taxes are there, but most people are actually out of the tax net. They are not within the tax net. That's the essence of it. But CITN is doing so much of enlightenment.
Just a moment, Mr. Emeke. I just need to get clarity on a point you made. If you can hear me, Mr. Emeke, pardon me. So you say that it's not about formalizing those illegal or unofficial taxes, but getting more people. So are you implying that those unofficial, illegal taxes can go on while we work on, getting more people?
No.
Okay, so what do you mean then?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying in essence is this: those illegal taxes are illegal. There's no two way about it.
So should they stop, or should we bring them in?
But what we're saying is, even within the legal taxes, a lot of people, a lot of businesses, a lot of corporations are outside the tax net. So when we're talking about widening the tax net, it means bringing most of these people into the tax net. Just like what my colleague said about some people having their leg all in the tax net, while the whole body is outside the tax net. That is the angle in which we are talking about.
So when you said that the finance bill is silent on VAT, I recall the Minister of Finance recently saying that, well, they didn't want to change it because of a litigation, surrounding the VAT. But there were still some amendments to the law that concerns FIRS in terms of who is meant to collect what, and we'll take that up. But I wanted to bounce this off you. So one of the reports that caught the eye of people regarding this finance bill is that a statement was credited to a lawmaker saying that part of the content of the bill is asking that the TIN be mandatory for account holders in the country. That's the tax identification number. And I honestly tried to look through that bill and I didn't quite see anything like that. Maybe I missed it. So, I mean, is that something you have seen as well? Is there, what part of that bill do you think references that or points to that?
Well, before now, even the issue of TIN, came up in 2019 Act. And it has already been implemented. I'm sure that there's no anybody that walk into the bank, to especially companies that want to register, that want to open bank account, without the bank authorities demanding for their tin. And besides, it's already seamless in terms of CAC registration. There's an interface between CAC and the FRS that once the companies are incorporated, automatically they generate tin for them. So in terms of tin generation, I think there's no much to be, emphasized over it. It's already in the bill.
Mr. Emeke, you may have misinterpreted my question. So what I meant is
making it more pronounced.
Not for corporate entities, I mean for individuals. There were reports yesterday that a certain section of the bill references that individuals, not corporate entities now, for individuals to open bank accounts or to continue to run bank accounts, they need to have the tax identification number. So I know that that's the case for corporate entities, but for individuals. But we need to go on a break right now. And when we return, we'll also ask Mr. Oyedele if he's, seen anything like that and what particular part of that bill references that, as well as other issues. That's in a moment. Please stay with us. You're welcome back, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, Africa Tax Leader, PwC, as well as Mr. Wabuzo Emeke, the Council Member at Chartered Institute of Taxation Nigeria. Still with us on the program this morning as we discuss the 2021 Finance Bill. It's like we have the taxation slant to the conversation, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but it's one of the sure things in life. It's a death and taxation is quite sure. So, Mr. Emeke, before we went on that break, I was asking you about the tin requirement, which has been reported to be in that bill. I tried to read through it. I didn't see it. For individuals who want to open accounts or continue to run their accounts. So that's what I meant for individuals and not for companies.
Well, I can't specifically say because I think I'm still actually studying the bill myself. So I can't specifically say which section of it that has to do with that.
Okay, so let me take this to Mr. Oyedele. That makes it two of us. I'm still studying as well. Mr. Oyedele, I think you've put out some content regarding this bill as well. So looking through it, did you see anything regarding the tax identification number for individuals who want to open an account or continue to run their accounts?
The answer is no. So there's no such thing in that bill at all. I do understand. I think this may be some misunderstanding by some tax professionals that some journalists spoke to, because the way the tax bills are numbered can be a little bit confusing. So you call it Finance Bill 2021, but it's for 2022 fiscal year. The same thing for the other previous one. So it may have created that confusion. In the 2019 Finance Act, there was the introduction of the requirement for TIN for businesses to open an account. In the 2020 Finance Act, that's the subsequent one, there was a provision for individuals doing business. So if you're just Taiwo and you're just Taiwo, just an employee, no business, you don't have that requirement. But if you have Taiwo and you are importing and clearing cars and selling them, or you're buying and selling iPhones, you're now doing business and you must indicate your TIN when you open a bank account. In the 2021 Finance Bill that we're talking about now, nothing about TIN, whether for corporate or whether for individuals. But I do think that even this emphasis on TIN is misplaced, because the reality is that people don't like to pay tax. I don't know any country where people are excited to pay their taxes. And it's even twice as difficult in Nigeria to pay your taxes, because you finish paying taxes and you still have to take care of what government should be taking care of for the people.
To take you up on that in a bit, if you don't mind. I want to take you up on that which you just mentioned now, because there are some elements and questions from me on that one. But when you talk about the fact that the tax identification number is seemingly absent, I saw a section on the amendment of the Value Added Tax Act, which says, for the purposes of this act, a non-resident person that makes a taxable supply to Nigeria shall register for tax with the service and obtain a tax identification number. Perhaps that's the only reference to TIN?
No, that's not a new requirement, because the conversation is we have a new requirement about TIN in this finance bill, right? So that's not a new requirement. Non-resident companies, including digital companies, have always been asked to register for tin. That provision you just read in the finance bill, it's just repeating what has been there. But then the intention of that amendment is about the requirement for those non-resident companies to now collect the VAT and pay to the FRS. Before now, those companies didn't need to collect the VAT. They only need to charge it, and the Nigerian recipients would remit it. So what they've done there is to just lift what is in the law currently, including the requirement for tin, and then amend just the provision about remitting VAT. So that requirement about tin you just read is not a new provision in the tax law.
So I think you referenced something about, I think I heard social media, and that has also been in the news. I mean, in fact, it was on the dailies this morning, setting 7.5% VAT on, I think, when you need to do transactions with social media. And, you know, looking through the bill, you see the part that amends the Companies Income Tax Act, and it says that any company that transmits, emits, or receives signals, sounds, messages, images, or data of any kind by cable, radio, electromagnetic systems, or any other electronic or wireless apparatus to Nigeria in respect. And it goes on, but essentially says that, I mean, their income shall be deemed taxable. So in terms of saying that you have to pay 7.5% VAT according to reports, and then this one, is this related, or there are two different things? In fact, is that one in the bill as well, the 7.5% VAT?
Yeah. No, 7.5% VAT is not in the bill, but it's an inference that makes sense. So the two are not related. The one you just displayed on the screen is now saying that as a non-resident company, particularly if you're a digital company, doing online adverts, or you're watching movies online, you know, all those stuff that we do with app stores and the rest of them, they're saying that the company providing those services to people in Nigeria and businesses in Nigeria must now pay income tax on the profit they earn from those activities. So that's the one about the CIT. The other one, I think, is the point that Ayo made earlier on about these companies are required to register with the FRS to obtain tin. That has always been the case. But in addition to that, they must now charge VAT and remit to the FRS. So what is expected, therefore, is that for those companies to comply, you then start seeing VAT on your invoices. So if you run a small business and you go on Instagram and you want to do a promo of your product, you know, imagine now this December where, you know, there's a lot of activities and promo, you then have to be charged 7.5% VAT because those companies needed to comply, and therefore you have to bear the burden of the VAT. So there's the two dimension. There's the tax to be borne by the companies, those digital foreign companies. There's the consumption tax, which is VAT, to be borne by the Nigerian consumer, all relating to digital economy.
Essentially, you're saying that, well, the bill is probably suggesting that there's going to be an increment on the services that they provide to Nigerians. Well, anyway, I guess I'll leave them to do that one. But there's something you referenced earlier about the fact that after you have paid taxes, you still have to take care of some things that government is supposed to take care of you. It only raises a question on my mind about the TED Fund Establishment Act, for instance, and the amendments to it. Tertiary education tax. And one still wonders if that is the case. There is a tertiary education tax, and a number of people are wondering how come the universities are the way they are. There is a little something that is supposed to go from corporations to the police fund, and people are still wondering how come the police is still the way it is. So the question then is, Mr. Idele, why should people be encouraged or compelled to pay tax when the things that their taxes are supposed to do still largely undone? How do we persuade people to pay taxes when things that the taxes are supposed to do are not done?
Yeah, no, I have to admit that it's very difficult to pay taxes in Nigeria. It is not easy, right? It's not easy anywhere in the world. I think it's twice as difficult in Nigeria because it's not funny and it's not convenient to part with your hard-earned money and give it to government. And on top of that, you then have to take care of everything else. And then you're wondering, what's the point of paying taxes in the first place? But I do think the encouragement that I have for Nigerians and businesses operating in this country to pay taxes, the other option we have is not viable. when you don't pay taxes to government or the taxes paid to government are not well managed, you then pay a lot more informal taxes and implicit taxes. So everybody has to pay tax in life. It depends on how you pay it and who you pay it to. So what we need to do as a country is to get to a point where government can actually earn the trust of the people to say, pay me your tax and I will take care of you. So that way it's less painful when you have to part with your money and your hard-earned resources in the form of taxes. So what we have currently is, take, for example, the conversation about government, and the World Bank has been saying this with their, global template, that Nigeria should introduce excise duties on, sweetening, soft drink, and the rest of it because, to control sugar, and they call them part of the sin tax. I say, well, on one hand, Nigeria does not have a sugar problem. Even based on the World Health Organization prescription, Nigeria's consumption is less than the minimum, than the prescription of what individuals should consume. That's on one hand. On the other hand, the countries where it makes sense to impose taxes on, tobacco, on alcohol, on sugar, is because when you have health problems, the state takes care of you because there's free health care, and that resources come from the people. So therefore, if you create more burden on that system, you should just contribute more. And that makes sense. In Nigeria, when I take too much sugar and alcohol and I have a problem, it is on me and my family and my friends. Government does not take care of me. So if you now impose tax because you want to control sugar, you make me pay the tax on one hand, and when I have healthcare problem, I also have to take care of myself, and that becomes double taxation. So we should just leave this conversation about sin tax and just focus on the fact that we want to raise revenue, and then ask ourselves, is this the most productive and effective way of raising revenue at this time in our national, development and situation?
So, Mr. Oyedele, when you say we want to raise revenue, and there are different layers to that. When you say we, I mean, there's a federal government, there's state government, there's meant to be local governments also, of course, collecting revenue. And this takes me to Mr. Meke. I know Mr. Oyedele's views on, I mean, we've spoken about, the recent VAT controversy, which is in court as we speak. But Mr. Meke, let me find out from you. So this law or this bill is coming out just right after the controversy, which you referenced earlier. And I wonder, in terms of practice, in reality, is there a status quo that is being maintained right now? What is the status quo that is being maintained right now in terms of VAT collection? I mean, you of course know, you followed the whole back and forth between, is it FIRS and state government? So we've seen some states enact laws that, empowers them to collect VAT within their areas. And we saw the FIRS saying, no, this is what it should be. And then the court said you could maintain status quo, and the question about what is status quo. So please tell us, in reality, for those states specifically that have those laws that back them to collect VAT, what is the practice? Are they collecting? Is it the FIRS that is collecting while the case continues in court?
Yeah, well, like you rightly put it there, they say they should return to status quo. That means that it's FIRS that is actually responsible for collecting VAT presently. But however, you can see that VAT is a consumption tax. And some of these states, like you mentioned, are equally collecting consumption tax. So indirectly, I will say that on the surface, FIRS is collecting VAT. But these states, because of the State Act, because of the state law, they are still collecting consumption tax, especially on restaurants and hospitality businesses.
And so you say, I mean, states are still finding a way around that. But I'd like to get your thoughts on this amendment, which was proposed for the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act. And it says that the FIRS is meant to take precedence over any other laws with regards to the administration, assessment, collection, accounting, and enforcement of taxes and levies due to the federal government or federation. I mean, I know that the Minister of Finance said that they didn't touch the VAT, but this law has been amended such that the FIRS now has powers to collect, I mean, any law, not just for the federal government, but for the federation. So do you think maybe this is a smart way to couch it and say, well, while we await the court judgment, let's just put this in place? And it says FIRS is meant to collect the taxes, the VAT, for the federation, which involves all the states?
Yes, well, like I said, on the surface, it looks as if that is how it's moving to now, because based on this statement you have just read out, it's like FRS have now been given the jurisdiction to handle virtually all the taxes on the exclusive list, you know, and that's so much to be said, because if at the end of the day the court end up going in favor of FRS, that means this statement will more or less support them in terms of them having access to all that is in the exclusive list in terms of tax collection.
What's your take on this? Hello, Mr. Ede, can you hear me? Go ahead. What's your take on this?
Yeah, thank you. I think that that provision is not, in my view, it's not even new. So it's what has been in different laws that they're trying to put together in a way that people can read again and understand. If you read the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act, it has a long list of taxes that FRS should collect. And it has a provision that says the FRS should administer taxes and coordinate issues to do with revenue. I do not think that the focus of this amendment is on the VAT, because you have to first and foremost ask yourself whether that question as to whether VAT is a federation tax or is a state tax, has that question been answered based on the Constitution? You know, the answer is up there in the air. So by saying that the FRS should collect and administer taxes for the federal government and the federation, what they have in mind is to align with the National Tax Policy of 2017. And it focuses on all revenues accruing to the federal government and also revenue accruing to the federation such that no individual state can collect. For example, consider import duties. You cannot ask all 36 states to go and stand at, in fact, with only federal government at the border, we're struggling to clear goods, right? So you can't ask all the states to go and stand at the border and collect import duties. You have international services. So you can't ask all the states to deal with foreign companies and foreign organizations to collect taxes. So this kind of taxes should be collected by the FRS, and I do support that. One of the problems we have is having too many agencies collecting taxes. In fact, this finance bill also says that when there is a need for tax investigation, call the FRS. EFCC should not be doing tax audit.
So, Mr. Oyedele, pardon me to butt in. We're winding down. And to be fair, I did say that, I mean, I know your views, at least to a large extent, on VAT and how the collection should be. But in terms of that particular amendment to Section 68 of the Federal Inland Revenue Act, I mean, the federation and the federal government bit was added, essentially. So it gives it a broader perspective. But as we wind down, let me just bounce this off you on a final note, and that's the amendment of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, because this is essentially also about getting revenues. But this one is about borrowing, and this is an amendment that I'd like to just get your final thoughts on as we wind out on this conversation. And it says that government at all tiers shall only borrow for capital expenditure, human development, and then the addition which this particular bill intends to add is, you can see it's highlighted there, is to undertake critical reforms of significant national impact. And of course, the other parts where it used to be with, and now it's all. But the point I'm trying to make here is, before it used to be government shall borrow for capital expenditure and human development before now. But now it's been, the parts to undertake critical reforms of significant national impact has been added. And I wonder, what does that mean? Does that just, open the doors to borrowing for anything, as far as you can just say to undertake critical reforms of significant national impact?
Yeah, I think there's a problem with that. Even the original provision of the law itself, as well as the proposed amendment, in my own view. So when you say government can borrow for capital expenditure, by the way, capital expenditure is defined to be any asset that lasts more than 1 year. So I can just be buying iPads. I can just be buying all manner of useless things, and I'll say they are carpets just because they can last more than 1 year. That even currently is the problem. Human development is not defined, right? So if I decide that I want to borrow money and share it to, poorest people in the villages, and only God knows whether they get the money, I can tell you it's human development because I need them to use it for, food, for healthcare, and for education. How are you going to be able to dispute that? Now, what we're adding is to say, you can also borrow for critical reforms of significant national impact. What does that even mean? I think while we're creating unnecessary confusion, we need to get to a point where in terms of our debt management, our revenue strategy, and expenditure efficiency strategy, it has to all be coordinated. We should only borrow when the borrowing will benefit our tomorrow. In other words, it's self-financing, it's going to stimulate the economy, and it has to be done in an efficient manner. All this thing about critical reform, about human development is too vague. And the definition of even capital expenditure is not appropriate for our circumstances.
On and on this one, Mr. Idele, because one of the questions I was going to ask you, when the federal government is proposing that the FIRS should be the only one collecting taxes and levies, my question came, and there is no amendment to the Customs Service Act. I'm wondering, is that included as well? But please don't answer that one now. We're completely out of time. Taiwo Idele is Africa Tax Leader, PwC, as well as Wabuzo Emeke, who is Council Member, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts this morning. All right, so we continue after now to take on another issue altogether, especially talking about human rights. It's Human Rights Day. Do stay with us.
When we say right for rights, people think, oh, can a pen really change a life? Can submitting a postcard, a letter, a comment, a word of encouragement to someone who is in prison for something that they allege they did not commit? Can someone who is facing trumped up charges, would they ever see justice? Can someone who has lost their lives or their livelihood as a result of fighting the injustices in their community, will they ever be acknowledged for the work and for their tireless service? So Right for Rights, as a flagship program for Amnesty International, brings the world together to address issues of great importance. This year, we are looking at various human rights defenders, mostly young people, as you can see, who are standing up in their communities and challenging injustice. When we gather together on human rights, the world listens, the world leaders pay attention. And while we are focusing on these cases today, it doesn't mean there are no other cases of importance. Every case of human rights violation is important. But we focus on these ones because we know the mobilization of a global movement can draw specific attention to these issues at critical time that these young people and human rights defenders are facing.
So, equality, reducing inequalities, advancing human rights. That's the theme for this year's Human Rights Day. It's not just a Nigerian thing, it's a global thing. And this theme for this year, which is reducing inequalities, advancing human rights, is sort of a reflection of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And that is something that is touted a lot. I mean, no government will come out and say, well, we're doing very bad when it comes to human rights. But when it comes to reality, there's still a lot of questions to be asked. And today we're taking time out to ask those questions. And we're focusing on specific areas which involve rights of the child, rights of women, rights of persons with disability, conditions of our prisons, which is a major one as well, and other detention centers, administration of criminal justice, torture, extrajudicial killings, which resonates a lot. I mean, you could recall the panels that were set up across the country. So, I mean, it's a tough task, really, to try to look into these things, but we'll do our very best to ensure that we at least throw up these issues and, put the responsibility at the right doors and ensure that hopefully they listen and do better when it comes to human rights. And this morning, we'll be joined by two guests. But you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm just, two words came to mind as you spoke about human rights: soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure. Yeah. One of the infrastructures in place for protection of human rights is the security system. How strong is that to protect the security and welfare of any human being? That one is a question that we need to ask ourselves over and over again. And even the people who are supposed to help protect the human rights themselves, how strong are their own human rights as well? Questions are limitless, and I guess the least we can do is to continue to raise the issues.
Absolutely.
And draw the attention of the authorities to it.
So let's raise those issues now. We're joined on the program this morning by Vanguard, who is the Director, Human Rights Education and Promotion at the National Human Rights Commission. She joins us from our Abuja studio. As you can see, she's a lawyer, child rights expert, member, African Union Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Good morning, madam. Thank you for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, good morning. It's good to be here.
We have joining us virtually Mr. Martin Obono, who's a human rights lawyer and advocate. He's the Executive Director, TAP Initiative for Citizens Development. He's a fellow for Alliance for Historical Dialogue and Accountability, Columbia University, New York. He holds an executive certificate on expanding impact of NGOs and public sector at Harvard Kennedy School. Mr. Obono, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let me begin in Abuja. So the saying, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. I wonder for you how true that is in Nigeria. Yes, this is a global commemoration, but we're narrowing it down to Nigeria. How true is that statement in Nigeria as a measure of our human rights quotient?
Yeah, thank you. You just stated Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Basically, that is an aspiration. So I think what we need to look at is what has been done so far to meet that aspiration, which speaks to equality and the recognition of human rights. So I would say, even if we are not yet there, steps have been taken. And so what matters is what steps, what measures have been taken to fulfill that. And in Nigeria, I would say the starting point is always the legal framework. And so it involves a review of what our legal framework is, how much it supports a human rights system, how much it recognizes human rights. So it requires looking at the legal framework across all the sectors of human rights, in the areas of discrimination, in the areas of vulnerability, in the areas of access to water, education, health, and all the economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as the other group of rights. So some steps have been taken. If we are going to measure, how much has been achieved, it takes a lot to review what has been achieved in Nigeria so far, but definitely steps have been taken, beginning with the legal framework, beginning with the establishment of structures for implementation of those frameworks. That's where we start.
Is it to say that we can't measure just how well we're doing, or perhaps you might want to share with us that measure? How well are we doing? Or are you saying that we can't tell how much we're doing or how well we're doing?
No, we can tell. We can definitely tell. That's why I say we start with what we have done in different sectors of human rights. For instance, in the issue of education, how much provision for education have we achieved? Because it talks that the universal basic education talks about, you know, compulsory free education. How much have we done there? For provision of health, how much have we done there? You know, it's so, like I said, it calls for a review. It's work in progress. That's the kind of point I'm trying to make. So it calls for a review of what we have done by sector, how much access we have to water, we have to food, we have to, you know, good roads, and what are the conditions between the urban and the rural communities. How deep are urban and rural disparities in these sectors, you know, because human rights is supposed to be enjoyed by everybody, despite their social status, despite their religion, their gender, and all that. So we also need to have a review of how much human rights are assessed at the community levels and all of that.
So let me see how Mr. Bono would rate our performance as a nation. And I say this as a nation, both government and the people. So, I mean, human rights in Nigeria is protected by the Constitution, the African Charter, the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and other various treaties that we're party to. But for you, in terms of scoring Nigeria, Mr. Bono, just how do you rate us?
Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So I would like to take it based on our own ground norm, which is the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees fundamental rights, and then I would like to take it one after the other. Let's take, for example, the right to life, the right to dignity of human person, the right to personal liberty, the right to fair hearing, the right to private and family, the right to freedom of expression and thoughts, and even conscience and religion, the right to freedom of expression. Now, if you take this one after the other, and we begin to juxtapose that and to see how we have fared fairly, how have we fared in terms of the right to life that is guaranteed by the Constitution, African Charter, United Nations Charter, and the rest of other international instruments and conventions. Now, in terms of right to life, what is the value of the Nigerian life? How has government fared in terms of protecting the lives and properties of citizens? We were just here the other day and we saw that a bus ran through children in Lagos State and killed all of them. What is the justice system in Nigeria that guarantees the right to life? How does even the law enforcement agents and agencies conduct themselves in terms of protecting the rights of citizens? Now we talk about the dignity of human person. How is the government, or how do we treat ourselves as people, as citizens of Nigeria? Am I happy in the morning waking up to know that I'm a citizen of Nigeria? If I travel from Nigeria to Gabon, if I travel from Nigeria to Canada, am I sure that if anything happens to me in those countries, my country will wake up and defend my rights? Am I sure that I'll be treated fairly as a citizen of Nigeria in terms of the fact that I have dignity as a human being? If, for example, something happens to me and I'm being arrested by the law enforcement, Nigerian police, army, whoever, would I be guaranteed that I would not face torture? Would I be guaranteed that I won't be stripped naked in handcuffs, put in front of cameras to be dehumanized? And so these are all the questions that we need to ask ourselves when it comes to rights to liberty, personal liberty. How are women treated in Nigeria? We woke up a few years ago to the consistent arrest of women on the streets of Abuja just because they are working or they're trying to just go and have a good time at night or have, join the nightlife and just be good, And we wake up to see that police arrest them, dehumanize them, and extort them and do all manner of heinous things to them.
You know, Mr. Bono, pardon me to cut in now. Incidentally, this coincides with the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So it's quite instructive that you referenced that point. But we need to go on a break now. And when we return, I'll allow you land on that point. Now we'll take a look at the things we need to do. I mean, where we need to look at to ensure that we uphold human rights even more. Do stay with us. Well, let's continue the conversation. So, Mr. Bono, you were making that point, and as you land on it, I'd like you to just add to it. You started from the grundum, which is the Constitution, and you know, I said earlier that we're taking a look at this as a nation. So, I'm talking government and the people. We have laws, the Constitution that guarantees, you know, those rights. We have the ACJ and a lot of others. But you see that in terms of operationalizing it, is it an agent of government or an individual, I should just say? They probably are not connected to those laws. So in terms, as you land on that point, I'd like you to also perhaps add to that point that it seems to be a disconnect between agents of government, individuals, people like you and I, who are most times fingered when it comes to abuse of human rights. So why do we have that disconnect?
Okay, so based on what I was saying initially in terms of the arrest of women and the justice system, and then the 16 days of activism that you mentioned. So essentially, I feel that the reason we have that level of disconnect is that is the level of enlightenment and the duty of care. Most of our security agents who are in the executive do not conduct themselves as though they really owe anybody a duty of care. And if you look at Section 17 of the 1999 Constitution, I think subsection 2, paragraph C, it talks about the actions of government must be very humane, must be humane. So somebody in government does not see himself as though he owes a duty of care to the average citizen or the Nigerian citizen on the streets. Everybody sees themselves as though they are overlords. And so a majority of them see themselves as though they are overlords, including law enforcement agents in this regard. And so they do not carry out their actions and activities in a humane manner, which is already guaranteed in the 1999 Constitution. So I do not know whether it is a level of enlightenment or it is training or just sheer wickedness that makes us treat human beings with so much impunity in our country and violate the rights of Nigerian citizens. And people really do not know how extensive these violations go in terms of making citizens feel like they do not owe the country any duty as well. So if I feel like my rights aren't protected in Nigeria and that the state is not there to guarantee those rights, then I'll go about with a lot of other impunity. But we thank God somehow for our judiciary. You know, at some point, we are able to get some level of balance and justices. But I think we still need to do a lot more in that regard. You know, looking at the way justice is being delivered in the law courts in terms of fundamental rights enforcement and all that. I think we still need to do a whole lot in terms of connecting those dots. Let there be let security agencies carry out their duties, you know, with a human face, you know, and let them consider that particular section of the Constitution, Section 17(2)(c), that says that every decision of the government has to be humane. And the law enforcement are the first people, you know, that we interact with or interface with on a day-to-day basis beyond any other person, you know, more than any other person. So once they stay on the streets, once there are so many.
Yeah, my apologies. There are so many things that you have raised in the little response that you've given to my colleague's question. But let me take this to Ms. Gava now in Abuja. This Human Rights Day has been celebrated since 12 years before Nigeria's independence in 1948. And the objectives are clear. Raise awareness about people's social, cultural, and physical rights, and to ensure the welfare of everyone. In terms of infrastructure to get this done, madam, from the very beginning, even up until now, would you say that we have the structures strong enough in place to ensure human rights in our country?
No, I would just bluntly say we do not have enough. For instance, if you look at the Child Rights Act, there is an implementation committee within the Child Rights Act that it's composite, and it ought to be well capacitated. It ought to be well facilitated by way of a budget, for it, and building of capacity of the members of that committee to be able to implement the Child Rights Act. And this cascades to all the child rights laws of the states. But you discover in the first place that this committee is not well supported to carry out that mandate. And then if you look at the Child Rights Act again, there are so many things that are not yet on ground. For instance, there are so many structures that ought to be in place, facilities to facilitate the implementation. For instance, places of custody for children. I'm just giving the example in the area of child rights. We do not have them on ground. And so we do not have, a very friendly or an enabling environment to implement child rights adequately. And so it also applies to other sectors. This year's theme is around equality. And so it speaks to issues concerning vulnerable groups. Why are our women, why do they appear more vulnerable? Why are they more vulnerable, than maybe the men? Or why are persons with disabilities, it seems disability is different when they do not have access to public spaces, when they do not have access to express themselves and to run a normal life. And then there is the issue of ignorance about human rights, This is very far-reaching. It is very inherent. People do not know their human rights well enough to speak up or to protest, a human rights infringement, and to protect another person whose rights is being infringed upon. So even though we have been celebrating the International Human Rights Day for a long time, like you said, there still needs a lot to be done. We need to have our institutions, our structures, all our mechanisms that promote human rights to have, more capacity, more support. We need to have an increased deployment of, budgetary resources to MDAs that are in one way or the other dealing with issues of human rights. Like I said, if it is an issue of education, we see it as a fundamental human right, then it ought to be well funded. And so we need to prioritize issues around human rights, in our budgetary structure. We need to get people to know more about their rights. And we need to know, especially people who are like my colleague was saying just now, people in the security makeup need to know more about human rights, and they need to know more about how to carry out their operations, in line with human rights standards. And so there is still a lot of work to be done. If I were to measure, I would say some progress has been made. Yes, some progress has been made. We've come a long way now, but more needs to be done. People need to know their rights more. People need to have to be empowered to speak out against human rights violations and infringements on their person or on a third party.
Well, Mr. Obono, let me bring this to you, since Madam has also referenced a thing or two that you said. Let's look at the process of even enforcing or championing human rights. You've talked significantly, and so has she, about those who are supposed to help enforce the human rights of Nigerians. Now, this Human Rights Day has been on since like 1948, and a good number, a sizable number of all the policemen and all the apparatus of government that are enforcing, or rather supposed to facilitate the human rights protection in our country today at whatever level of government, none has been born at that time. A good number of them hasn't been born at that time. So I'm wondering how, in what way do you think we should, I don't know, maybe coach them in, train them in to human rights and all those things? Because people who themselves haven't had their human rights protected, get into a position of protecting other people's human rights, what's going to happen?
So I think it's not about how long, but it's also about how I mean, I wasn't born when all these things happened, but I've been able to know what is right and what's wrong. So the police, the military must all have rules of engagement, and it's very important in terms of dealing with situations. The police officer who is on the streets, who interfaces with people on a daily basis, must have the rules of engagement. The military officer who is protecting our territorial integrity, who are patrolling our borders, must also have rules of engagement. From the point of recruitment, it must be very stated, it must be stated clearly that human rights is key to protection of lives and property. And that's what beats me most when I see the government.
Oh, no, just 1 second.
General.
In terms of the rules of engagement that you mentioned, do you see it grafted into their training? Do you see any such manifestation?
Yes, it's not to be drafted in their training. From the time you get into the either police academy or you enroll in the Nigerian Defense Academy or you're being recruited, it has to be in their curriculum. Those rules of engagement must be spelled out clearly as to how to engage with citizens.
But that's the question I'm asking, Mr. Obono. That's the question I'm asking. Do you see such manifestation?
Well, I don't see such manifestations. We can't see it on the streets. We deal with people who have human rights cases on a day-to-day basis, and we don't see that evidence. It's not manifested in the way law enforcement carry themselves on a daily basis. So there's a lacuna in that aspect. There's a need for training. There's a need for retraining. It's not just enough to start the training or from the point of entry, but there's also need for that retraining to continue. So for us to get to that level, there has to be constant reminder of these people that you owe citizens a duty of care to protect them,
So let's go to our Abuja studio. I was going to say let's go to Abuja. We are both in Abuja, so to our studio in Abuja. And, when we talk about human rights, yes, we reference a lot, and rightly so, the activities of, some of the security agents that go out of line, in terms of brutality and the rest. But I came across something quite important, and I know that this is an area that you are also vast in, and it's the economic, social, and cultural rights, which is enshrined in one of the covenants Nigeria is a treaty to. That's the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And it essentially speaks about providing basic rights such as shelter, food security, education, access to health. Now, I'm saying this because, part of the theme for this year's commemoration is reducing inequalities. And there's always a talk about the huge gap, the huge poverty gap in Nigeria. I know there's a term in this setting that talks about progressive realization. But for Nigeria, really, in terms of ensuring those basic rights of shelter, food, quality health, and all that, where lies our challenge, really?
Where our challenge, in the first place, you have just said it. I think it lies, first of all, in that window that says economic, social, and cultural rights are realizable only subject to availability of resources. So that lowers accountability, because that is a very subjective term. It is subject to a lot of interpretation. We don't know when resources are available. And, even by way of terminology, it sounds as if that has already been downgraded. It can only be attended to when resources are available. And so it downgrades the position of economic, social, and cultural rights. But interestingly, economic, social, and cultural rights really are the crux of human rights. When we don't have access to health, to shelter, to food, these are issues that touch around human dignity and which strip any human being of their dignity. And of course, they are directly There's the intersection with the right to life that we consider to be paramount, which is actually very paramount. But what is the right to life when you do not have right to food, when you do not have right to shelter, and you are exposed to a lot of hazards? And so the issue of availability of resources, it raises very serious issues around accountability. And so it calls for strengthening of accountability, across the sectors for those in power, and, the fact that human rights must be provided. And so, and that's why for some NGOs, they have done a lot of work, and some have approached courts of law, domestically and internationally, on issues that involve, provision of economic, social, and cultural rights. Right to economic resources for livelihoods are very important. And, they define what dignity is. They define the right to life, a right of, an equal level of access to health, it defines. And so it calls for more accountability. It calls for stakeholders, to continue to monitor and to continue to ask and call for accountability at all levels, There's a lot of work to be done in that area, to give an interpretation to what availability of resources is, and to upgrade and step up these rights, to economics, to civil and political rights, which are considered to be more fundamental. And so, like I said earlier, it's work in progress. All actors, all stakeholders must begin or must continue to call for accountability, to call for provision of economic, social, and cultural rights.
What are the consequences, madam, of not protecting people's human rights as enshrined in the laws? What are the consequences?
Well, the consequences are that, judicially speaking, people whose rights have been violated, be it by law enforcement, or whose rights have been infringed upon or abused, even at domestic levels, are entitled to a level of compensation, a level of redress. Redress could come, by way of restitution, to bring them back to a certain state of life, for instance, as you have under the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, for instance, a girl child who has been violated maybe sexually and is supposed to be brought back to her state in life, maybe to be restored back to education. So the consequences involve a level of restoration, indeed total restoration, of what a person would have lost, and steps to be taken to restore their dignity, and their self-worth too. And sometimes it comes in the form of monetary compensation, which is much of the time ordered by a court of law, to compensate and pay damages to a person whose rights have been violated. As we have been saying, there have been a lot of mechanisms set up to look into activities of maybe law enforcement, and you see that much of the time it comes out with orders as to compensation. The idea here being to bring the person back to a state of their dignity and to a state where they recover what was lost. And so those are some of the, the measures that can be taken to address issues of human rights violation or human rights.
Okay, just before
abuse.
I go to Mr. Obono on Zoom, I just want to ask this one, and it borders on human rights as well, and it concerns. I'm sure you've seen the controversy that trailed the panel here in Lagos. I know that the NHRC also inaugurated a panel in Abuja that, of course, has been conducting proceedings. I believe proceedings resumed of recent. Is there any updates regarding that, and when can we expect maybe a paper, an eventual white paper? Because, all eyes essentially are on all the panels to see what will come out of it.
Yes, I can imagine. I quite understand that. Where the proceedings are ongoing, just like you said, and there's a lot of progress. Some orders have been made so far, but of course it's still ongoing. The hearings are still on. And it's a good thing, just like you said, it has resumed sitting, and it's going on right away. I couldn't have a precise impression of when the committee, it could come to a close, but I think maybe next year, maybe by next year, maybe early next year. I have not actually had a look at their case list, there, but by next year it should be coming to a close, considering the fact that, issues before that panel are very important and they are kind of time-bound, and time is of the essence because they affect the human rights of persons. And so to comment on the substance, of what is before the panel, of course, as you know, it's sub judice, but a lot of progress has been made. We have encountered, I have personally encountered people who were walking out because they had received maybe an order that they considered favorable. And so it's ongoing, and a lot of work is being done there.
As you said, time is of the essence, and we're winding down as well on the program now. So let me just end with Mr. Obono. So this day is being commemorated. There was one last year. There should be another next year, hopefully. But for you, what would you say, what would you like to see change in terms of, and I'll say again, as a nation, government and the people, in terms of making commitment to ensuring that human rights are better upheld in the country?
Thank you. Basically, I'd like to quickly chip in something when you talked about the economic, socio-economic rights and the rights guaranteed under section, chapter 2 of the Constitution. So for me, basically, those rights are enforceable, they are justiciable. Usually what most people say is that the rights under chapter 2 are non-justiciable. That means you cannot enforce them when you go to court. But if you look at these rights individually and you subsume them with the rights to life, if you don't have food on your table, can you leave? The question is no. If you don't have shelter, if you don't have security, if you're not provided with those basic provisions that are under chapter 2, you can't leave, you can't have right to life. So socio-economic rights are actually enforceable. If you cannot enforce them under chapter 2, as it were, if you cannot subsume them differently under chapter 2, you can actually enforce them under the African Court on Human and People's Rights, which has the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which then shows you that you have those socio-economic rights protected under the African Charter. Now, what can we do in terms of protecting the rights of people? I think we need to look at ourselves as human beings and be able to say that you care for one another. Basically, that is on a horizontal level. When I talk about horizontal level, I'm talking about citizens to citizens.
And now, I think that's a fantastic place to anchor, Mr. Obono. I mean, care for one another across all levels. So I would like to thank you so much, Director, Human Rights, Education and Promotion, National Human Rights Commission, and lawyer Ava Gava. She joined us from our Abuja studio, as well as Mr. Martin Obono, human rights lawyer and advocate, is Executive Director, TAP Initiative for Citizens Development. Thank you so much for your thoughts as well. We do appreciate them.
A quick look at at least two of these mails. Let's begin with this one by Lauren Lobardini, who says, human rights protection. Dating back to the colonial period, our human rights record has been consistently poor and unimpressive. At the moment, the situation has not significantly improved. Lack of equity, freedom, and equality permeates the nation's landscape, as it is reflected in the unequal distribution of wealth and basic amenities capable of engendering human rights. This imbalance has subjected many to hardship, domination, neglect, economic and political marginalization, and denial of rights.
Well, Louis Afolabi, quickly on the finance bill, says payment of taxes is very critical to the survival of any system and must be supported by all citizens. But any tax law that will make it difficult or almost impossible for students and unemployed Nigerians to access the banking system to get financial assistance from relatives and friends will be counterproductive. I think Mr. Oyedele cleared the air on that. There is nothing that says you need your TIN for opening an account or running an account in Nigeria.
Well, Henry Okeke and Festus Akinwewa, we got your mails as well, and several others that we were unable to take today. Thank you so much for sending them in. This is where we anchor Sunrise Daily this morning. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm Ayo Makinde.
And I'm Kayode Okikelu. Do have a fantastic weekend.